Lisbon in the early 1700s was one of Earth's richest cities. Nearly 275,000 people lived in this Portuguese capital built on 7 hills overlooking the Atlantic. Gold and diamonds from Brazil flowed through its port. Spices from India filled its warehouses. The city glittered with Baroque churches, royal palaces, and the wealth of a global empire. But on November 1st, 1755, everything changed. A massive earthquake, followed by a tsunami and fires, destroyed most of the city in a single morning. In this video, I use modern AI tools to bring historic paintings, engravings, and prints to life, allowing us to shift perspective, change camera angles, and move through scenes in ways their original artists never could. These reconstructions let us walk through a Lisbon that vanished almost 270 years ago. This view shows the Terreiro do Paço, the Grand Royal Square facing the Tagus River, around 1740. The massive Ribeira Palace dominates the waterfront, its yellow walls stretching over 200 meters along the shore. Marble steps lead down to the water where small boats are moored. Elegant arcades line 3 sides of the square. The river fills with ships from around the world, their masts creating a forest against the sky. By the 1740s, this square was the beating heart of Portuguese power. The Ribeira Palace housed King João V, his court, and the administrative center of a global empire. The arcades below held royal archives, libraries containing thousands of manuscripts, and the treasury filled with Brazilian gold. The smell of the sea mixed with spices being unloaded from warehouses. Horses and carriages crossed the square constantly. Court officials in silk and velvet moved between buildings. The riverfront location created constant risk. High tides sometimes flooded the lower palace rooms. The wooden arcade structures were vulnerable to fire. The concentration of so much wealth and irreplaceable documents in one place meant any disaster here would be catastrophic for the entire kingdom. The Terreiro do Paço mattered because it was where Portugal met the world. Foreign ambassadors presented credentials here. Trading companies conducted business under the arcades. Royal proclamations were announced from palace balconies. This square represented centuries of Portuguese exploration, conquest, and wealth extracted from 3 continents. Then came the morning of November 1st, 1755. The earthquake struck at 9:40 a.m. during All Saints' Day Mass. The Ribeira Palace collapsed almost immediately. The tsunami that followed swept across the square minutes later, drowning survivors and carrying debris inland. Fires consumed what remained. Today, the Terreiro do Paço still exists, rebuilt in the 1770s as the Praça do Comércio. The Yellow Palace is gone. Only the square's outline and riverside location remain the same. This view shows the Rua Nova dos Mercadores, one of the main commercial streets of the Baixa district, around 1745. A narrow street lined with 4- and 5-story buildings creates a canyon of whitewashed walls and red tile roofs. Ground floor shops display fabric, gold jewelry, and imported goods. Merchants in dark coats and tricorn hats negotiate deals. The street rises toward the upper city, church towers visible on the hilltops. The Baixa was Lisbon's commercial center. By the 1740s, hundreds of merchants conducted business here. The streets smelled of cinnamon, pepper, and other spices stored in nearby warehouses. Goldsmiths worked in small shops, crafting jewelry from Brazilian gold. The sound of commerce filled the air, vendors calling prices, coins clinking on counting tables, carts rumbling over cobblestones, and constant negotiation in Portuguese, Spanish, English, and Dutch. The density created danger. Buildings stood wall to wall with no space between them. Many had been expanded upward over centuries, creating unstable upper floors. Fires spread quickly through connected structures. The narrow streets meant that when buildings collapsed, debris could completely block passages, trapping entire neighborhoods. The Baixa mattered because it made Lisbon wealthy. The merchants here controlled trade routes spanning from Brazil to Macau. The shops sold luxury goods to the aristocracy and the growing middle class. The district generated enormous tax revenue for the crown. The earthquake destroyed nearly every building in the Bexar. Survivors who escaped the initial collapse were trapped when tsunami waves surged up the narrow streets from the river. The fires that followed burned for 6 days. Today, the Bexar exists as a grid of perpendicular streets designed by the Marquis of Pombal after 1755. The new city was built directly on top of the ruins. Remarkably, recent archaeological excavations beneath modern buildings have uncovered shops and homes from the pre-earthquake city, preserved under meters of rubble. This view shows the Sé de Lisboa, the city's ancient cathedral in the 1730s. The fortress-like Romanesque facade with its twin towers dominates the hillside. Stone walls thick enough to withstand sieges rise above the surrounding neighborhood. Narrow medieval streets wind around the cathedral. Small houses built against the cathedral walls create a dense urban fabric. The Tagus River gleams in the distance. The Sé had stood for nearly 600 years. Built in 1147, after Christians reconquered Lisbon from the Moors, it represented the permanence of Portuguese Catholicism. Inside, the cathedral held priceless relics, including bones of Saint Vincent, Lisbon's patron saint. The interior smelled of incense, candle wax, and old stone. Choir music echoed through the nave during services. The cathedral's age created vulnerabilities. Previous earthquakes in 1344 and 1531 had damaged parts of the structure. Repairs over centuries meant the building contained a patchwork of different construction techniques. The houses built against the cathedral walls weakened its foundations. The Sé mattered as the spiritual heart of Lisbon. Every important religious ceremony took place here. Kings were married in this cathedral. Royal children were baptized here. The building represented continuity with the medieval Christian kingdom. The 1755 earthquake destroyed much of the cathedral. The main chapel collapsed, killing worshippers attending All Saints' Day Mass. The ambulatory and several chapels fell into ruins. Remarkably, the Romanesque facade and nave survived. Today, the Sé still stands on the same hillside, reconstructed after the earthquake. You can visit this cathedral and stand in the same nave where medieval kings once prayed. This view shows the Alfama neighborhood climbing the steep slope below São Jorge Castle around 1750. A maze of narrow alleyways, barely 2 meters wide, winds between whitewashed houses. Laundry hangs from iron balconies. Stone staircases climb between different levels of the neighborhood. The castle walls at the hilltop overlook everything. Alfama was Lisbon's oldest neighborhood, preserving the medieval Moorish street plan. By the mid-1700s, it housed sailors, fishermen, and working-class families. The streets smelled of salted fish drying on racks, of cooking oil and garlic, of the sea breeze that climbed the hill. The sound of fado music, melancholy Portuguese songs, drifted from tavern doorways in the evenings. Life in Alfama was precarious. There was no sewage system. Waste was thrown into the streets. Water had to be carried up from public fountains. The steep slopes made every task exhausting. Fire was a constant threat in the tightly packed wooden balconied houses. Alfama mattered because it was authentic Lisbon, not the royal squares or wealthy merchants' houses, but the neighborhood where ordinary people lived generations of family history. The district had survived the 1531 earthquake relatively intact. Remarkably, Alfama survived the 1755 earthquake better than any other part of Lisbon. The old Moorish construction techniques and the hillside location protected it from the worst damage. While the lower city was destroyed, much of Alfama remained standing. Today, Alfama is Lisbon's most historic district. You can still walk the same narrow medieval streets, climb the same stone staircases, and hear fado music from the same taverns where sailors sang 300 years ago. This view shows the Castillo de São Jorge crowning Lisbon's highest hill in the 1740s. Massive stone fortifications with square towers dominate the skyline. The royal standard flies from the highest tower. The castle grounds contain barracks, armories, and the royal archives. A panoramic view stretches across all of Lisbon and the Tagus River to the hills beyond. The castle had protected Lisbon for over 800 years. Originally built by the Moors in the 11th century, it had been expanded by every Portuguese king since. By the 1740s, it served primarily as a fortress, military garrison, and archive for state documents. The smell of gunpowder from the armory mixed with horses from the cavalry stables. Sentries walked the walls day and night. Despite its strength, the castle faced dangers. Its age meant constant maintenance was required. The concentration of military, supplies, gunpowder, weapons, ammunition meant that fire could cause catastrophic explosions. The documents stored in the royal archives were irreplaceable records of Portuguese exploration. São Jorge Castle mattered as the ultimate symbol of Portuguese sovereignty. For centuries, whoever controlled this castle controlled Lisbon and therefore Portugal. The fortress had withstood sieges, revolutions, and previous earthquakes. The 1755 earthquake severely damaged the castle. Towers collapsed. The royal archives were destroyed. Much of the fortification required complete reconstruction. The military garrison was relocated. Today, São Jorge Castle is one of Lisbon's most visited sites. The walls you walk along are partially original and partially 20th century reconstructions. But the view from the battlements, looking across Lisbon to the Tagus, remains almost unchanged from what soldiers saw in the 1740s. This view shows the Igreja do Carmo, the Carmelite church and convent, in the upper city around 1735. The Gothic church rises with soaring pointed arches and a facade decorated with intricate stone tracery. The bell tower reaches toward the sky. The convent buildings spread behind the church, housing dozens of Carmelite monks. The Carmo was one of Lisbon's most beautiful churches. Built in the 1380s, it represented the finest Gothic architecture in Portugal. The interior held gilded altarpieces, religious paintings by Portuguese masters, and the tombs of nobles and knights. The space smelled of incense that had soaked into the stone after 350 years of daily mass. Light filtered through stained glass windows, creating patterns of color on the stone floor. The church's height created danger. Gothic architecture depended on precise engineering, pointed arches transferring weight to exterior buttresses. Any damage to the buttresses would cause the roof to collapse. The large windows weakened the walls. The Carmo mattered as a masterpiece of Portuguese Gothic art and a powerful religious institution. The Carmelite order was influential in Portuguese religious life. The church attracted pilgrims and wealthy patrons. The building represented the height of medieval faith and craftsmanship. The earthquake destroyed the Carmo completely. The roof collapsed during the tremor, killing worshippers at Mass. The vaults fell, bringing down tons of stone. Only the exterior walls and arches survived, left standing open to the sky. Today, the Carmo convent remains as a romantic ruin, the roofless Gothic arches preserved as a memorial to the earthquake. You can stand inside the church and look up at empty sky where vaulted ceilings once soared. This view shows the Terreiro do Paço at dawn on November 1st, 1755. The royal square is quiet in the early morning light. A few servants cross toward the palace. The Ribeira Palace sits peacefully, its windows beginning to glow with candle light. The Tagus River is calm and silver. Everything appears normal. In less than 4 hours, this entire scene will cease to exist. All Saints' Day was one of the most important religious holidays. By 9:30 a.m., churches across Lisbon were packed with worshippers. Candles burned on every altar. The weather was beautiful, clear skies, mild temperature, gentle breeze. There was no warning. At 9:40 a.m., the first tremor struck. It lasted between 3 and 6 minutes. Buildings that had stood for centuries collapsed in seconds. The sound was described as like thunder that never ended. Then came a brief pause. and a second stronger shock completed the destruction. Survivors ran toward the waterfront, believing they would be safe in the open space of the Terreiro do Passo. They were wrong. Approximately 40 minutes after the earthquake, the tsunami arrived. 3 waves, some as high as 6 meters, swept across the waterfront. Those who had survived the earthquake drowned in the square they thought would save them. Then the fires began. Candles from All Saints' Day masses had ignited collapsed buildings. The fires burned for 6 days, consuming everything the earthquake and tsunami had not destroyed. Contemporary estimates said that 85% of Lisbon's buildings were destroyed. Between 30,000 and 60,000 people died. The 1755 Lisbon earthquake was one of the deadliest disasters in European history. It changed how Europeans understood natural disasters. Philosophers like Voltaire used it to question religious explanations of suffering. It led to the birth of modern seismology. Today, modern Lisbon was rebuilt on top of the ruins by the Marquis of Pombal with earthquake-resistant design. But beneath the streets, the remains of pre-earthquake Lisbon still exist, buried but not forgotten. Standing here in the present, looking back at Lisbon in the early 1700s, it feels both distant and impossibly close. The earthquake destroyed this city in minutes, but it took decades to rebuild. Walking through modern Lisbon, you are constantly walking above the ruins of the city that was lost. History here doesn't feel like the past. It feels like a layer underneath the present. If there's another city or moment in history you'd like me to reconstruct and explore, let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you so much.